Hi, welcome to Chad Silversmithing. Before we get too far into the video, if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that really helps to get my channel promoted, and I appreciate that immensely. I also love it when people leave comments, so if you have a question or an idea for a video, or you want to tell me how you do things, or you just want to say hi, those are all great, and I love to hear from you. So it's getting to be that time of year. It's springtime, and I have a number of shows coming up, and since I started doing the YouTube channel, I have a tendency to make sort of big and fancy pieces primarily, and so when you're doing a show, it's nice to have kind of a broad spectrum of price points, especially when the economy is not great like it is right now. And so a lot of times there's people who just want to take a souvenir home and they can't afford a $400 piece or something. So it's nice to have some ways to flesh out your inventory, and I'm going to kill two birds with one stone. I've had several people ask over the past couple of years how to make little tiny bezels, and so I'm going to do some relatively small stone bezels today. And we're going to make some little tiny kind of delicate rings that sell for a lower price point, but are very pretty, I think. And so it's a good way to flesh out your inventory, and we'll talk about some strategies for making tiny bezels. So before we do that, though, I wanted to thank some people. My patrons over on Patreon are an awesome group of people who are my kind of primary supporters, and I don't know what I would do without them, and I really appreciate them. So they make a lot of this possible, and they've formed this really cool community over there with a lot of great talented people who swap ideas and resources, and it's a nice place. So thank you for making it that way, and thank you for your support. My other group are my YouTube subscribers, and I think we just passed 20,700-ish, which is awesome and amazing. I can't believe that whenever I see that number. Thank you for that, and thank you for all of the nice comments. I really appreciate it when someone tells me that they've gotten something useful out of one of my videos. It's nice to know that you're having a positive effect out there and not just having this be a job. So thanks for that. It's nice to know that I'm helping people. I also do appreciate the super thanks and the buy me coffees. Materials have gotten kind of expensive, and that really helps out with that. So thanks for that, and let's get started on these projects. Okay, this is one of my design idea sketchbooks that you can get on my merch store. The more recent ones have some different charts on the back. This one has a wire gauge to inches to millimeters, which a lot of people overseas find useful, since many of them don't use gauges like we do in the US. The other thing I like about these is the grid pattern in the background, because I'm not really good at drawing, and so it helps me to kind of keep things symmetrical, and that's always nice. So pictures today aren't very exciting because they're just little tiny simple bands. However, they are good sellers when you make them. So here's the stones I picked out. I didn't pick out so small that you wouldn't be able to see what I was doing, but still pretty small. So here's what we have. So this is just a little cabochon. It's a 3mm garnet, and we're going to make a little tiny ring with a bezel for that one. So that'll be here. For this one, I'm just going to use some 16 gauge square wire that I've flattened. I had a little piece laying around, and I thought might as well use that for something. So it's going to be very dainty and small with a little pretty garnet in it. That'll be the first one. Second one, I'm going to do a faceted stone, and so we're going to do a slightly different kind of bezel. It's going to be open on the back, so we'll have to create a little shelf on the inside, or a lip, and or a step is what they usually call it. And I'm going to use some 20 gauge round wire. I normally use 18 for bigger stones, but 20, these are getting pretty small, so you want to make sure to still have some light that can come through the back. Mostly that's to deal with the pavilion of a faceted stone, which is where it comes to a point. I don't know if you can see that on the camera or not, but hard to set in a bezel, and it doesn't look as good in just a closed back bezel. So we'll make a little simple one for that. And then I thought I would do a square stone as well. I have these little synthetic red rubies that were a gift from one of my patrons, and they're very pretty, really sharp corners, and these ones are about, I think it was about 3 or 4 millimeters, 4 millimeter maybe. Pretty small, but beautiful, I think. Oh, and the band on this one, I'm going to use some 12 gauge half round. And this one I'm going to use 14 gauge round, and I'm going to texture it a little bit to give it something different. So you can do all sorts of little variations on these things to jazz them up in lots of different stones. And I think you'll find that they're a pretty popular seller, you know. And with things like this, you know, given the current market, you could probably sell these at, you know, under $50 each and make a profit. So, so let's make some rings here. To start with, I'm going to use some pretty thin bezel. I got 28 gauge here. And sometimes when I'm doing really small stones, I use this thin bezel like this. I normally use a taller bezel than this, but I cut this down to about 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters or so, just to save myself some filing at the end, because I'm not going to need bezel that tall for these little tiny stones. So there's really not much of a trick to doing this. It's just downsizing what you're doing. I find, and this works really well for me, let me file the end flap first. I find that my fingers are too big to really get a grab and wrap something around something that small. So if I take the needle nose pliers like this, or chain nose pliers, actually let's grab it with my hand turned like this. And then this stuff has a little bit of springiness to it. So if you kind of loosely pull it like that, it kind of naturally forms a curve if you do this carefully. Okay, so we got it kind of shaped in the shape it needs to be. Now that it's that shape, we can push it down over the stone and get pretty close. Got a little bit of space there, so I really, with this small of a stone, I don't want a lot of excess space between the stone and the bezel, so that we have a pretty snug fit. So I'm gonna mark it, but I'm gonna mark it just a hair beyond where they meet, and that's because I need to file a little bit to get the second side straight. For a while there was kind of a trend with younger people wearing really dainty stuff, and it's not always the case, but I was finding a few years back that a lot of the younger women who'd come by who were looking for rings would say, "Oh, my grandma would love this one," you know, talking about the bigger, more ornate kinds of things. And so I tried making some little tiny ones, and they sold pretty well. So it's good to have a mixture of things, I think. I think it's nice if you kind of develop your own kind of style, but then also, you know, and make that your kind of centerpiece display, but then also have some more affordable kinds of things for people who just can't afford the big end ticket pieces, or who just don't like things that are, you know, of that particular ilk. Okay, let's make this into a kind of a square. I always find the best luck with that. I should have picked smaller stones, although I do want you to be able to see what I'm doing. Let's try to get that lined up. Set him off to the side for a minute, knowing that I'll probably, when I'm sweeping some stuff off the table, and send it flying somewhere. That's my normal MO. Okay, if you haven't been to my channel before, I use hard silver sheet solder for almost everything. I use liquid flux that I dribble on with a dropper bottle. My torch is a Silversmith model. It's their acetylene air torch, and so it draws in atmospheric air through there to mix with the acetylene so it burns nicely. It's only got the one tank. It doesn't have an oxygen tank like an oxyacetylene torch, and it's not as hot as that, but it's hotter than a propane torch. So it's a nice kind of happy medium for silver work. I really like it. And although Smith is not a sponsor, I would happily have them sponsor me. Smith, I promote your product all the time because I actually like it. Alright. With this little piece of metal, it doesn't take very long to get it hot enough for that to flow. See that? So I also want you to note that I did this unevenly this time, and so the solder, if you get one side of the bezel hot enough for the solder to flow but the other side hasn't quite reached it, what happens is what just happened to me there, is it jumps to one side like that. So what I usually do if that happens is you can throw another little piece on there. Let's grab this one here if I can grab it. Come here. Now stay. It's going to be one of those days. Okay, now we'll try and heat it a little bit more evenly. There we go. If you have the second piece touching the puddle that's on the one side and the other side, it usually just kind of flows and you got it made then. So let's shape this. I'm just going to kind of pinch those corners out. And then I'll pinch out the remaining uneven parts that I left after pinching those corners, and I'm pinching pretty gently. And once you get it relatively round, if you have a jump ring mandrel or a bezel mandrel that's round, you can just slide it down on that and lightly tap it until it's round. That's one way, but you don't absolutely have to have those to do this. I don't know if this will fit on my jumping mandrel. Yeah, it's too small for that. So you could do it on either one of these graduated bail making pliers maybe, just to kind of like smooth out the sides a little bit. Yesterday I did a little bracelet with some calla lily flowers on it for my Patreon folks for an exclusive. That was kind of fun to do. I made the theme over there flowers for this month. So I usually give them a monthly theme to inspire some ideas. And it seemed appropriate this time of year. So that was my entry in this month's theme. It's snug, but I think it's okay. Yep, that looks good. Okay, so I'm going to give it just a slight file on either side. Kind of make sure it's nice and flat. You can use a smaller file than this if you prefer. I kind of always try to use the bigger file if I can, for a couple of reasons. One, it takes off material more quickly. And two, it's easier to keep it stable and flat. It has a wider surface, so it's harder to get it misaligned. A little tiny thing you can twist in your hand pretty easily. And that kind of is less than desirable. Okay, so I found a little piece of scrap 26 gauge sheet, which I'm going to use for the back. So I'm going to cut a little piece off of there. It's nice when you got a little bit of scrap hanging around and you can find a little piece of something you can recycle. Especially when silver is as expensive as it is right now. I have plenty of solder over here. So what I'll do, I'm going to position it on this sheet. I flatten the sheet out a little bit, flux it, and then we'll put, probably only need one of those pieces inside of this one, but it's got to be touching the side and the bottom. And then when I heat it from the outside like this, it should just run right around that whole seam as long as I get it hot enough. You want to point right where the two come together though from the outside and kind of keep it pointed that way. It doesn't take too long with this size of a bezel, so you got to really kind of keep your eyes on things. Otherwise you can overheat stuff and melt things. Especially when small stuff like this. And once you melt it, if you do, you can add that to your list of about 30 bezels you should make before you start to feel like you're proficient at bezels. Maybe 40. So don't get too discouraged. I was challenged with bezels at first a little bit. So I'm just going to trim off the excess now. And we'll just file that lip down to where it looks like there's no seam whatsoever. You want to be careful when you're doing this not to hit too high up on the bezel. It's okay to file it flush with the bottom of the bezel here. But when you start getting that top thinner, it starts to become really fragile with this thin a bezel. So once you've made a few with this thinner stuff, you can probably move up to using a little bit thicker bezel than this. But this is good practice, and it's fine for low-end pieces. Okay, so get that filed smooth. And I'm going to set that aside for now, and then we'll come back and put a band on it at the end. But let's move on to the amethyst here, and we'll do an open back bezel for that. Okay? That way, if you don't care about the band part of the video, you can just skip the end. I spent most of my time searching for things that I've chucked off to the side after I was done using them. I just yawned. I'm really bringing the energy today with this video. Okay, let's do the same thing we did before as far as getting a little circle started. I sometimes wonder what it would be like to have the fingers of a neurosurgeon. Long and slender and agile instead of these clunky things. So we're going to do pretty much the same thing, except instead of a bottom, we're going to do something different to make a open back. Some people, when they do open backs on stuff, they'll solder a back on it and then cut a hole in it or drill a hole in it. And I do that a little differently. I think that there's nothing wrong with doing that. I said this once and I upset somebody. But I think it looks neater when you have a piece of wire soldered to the inside, because you have a perfectly neat edge on it. Let's see if I can solder it better this time. You're not supposed to mess up when you're doing an instructional video, Chad. Although, to be fair, I like to leave mistakes like that in because those are the kind of things that people need to know. Just want to, if everything in your video is perfect and works perfect every time, people get an unrealistic expectation of what to expect when they're learning how to do this. And quite honestly, when you do mess things up, I find that that's one of the most opportune learning experiences, because it gives you the chance to analyze something that actually went wrong in front of you. And you can ask the question, okay, so what did I do there that caused that? And that almost always results in a learning outcome where you get better at this. So I don't begrudge my mistakes too much. I've had in-person students over the years who absolutely couldn't tolerate any kind of failure. And that would be a hard way to live, I would think, because having that high of expectations for yourself that you're supposed to do something perfect the first time you try it. I used to think that way a little bit, but I mean, nobody likes to fail. However, like I said, if you analyze it, you're a lot less likely to do it again because you'll figure out why you did it. I'm chatty today. What's wrong with me? Yeah, that's about right size-wise. So let me file this one a little bit too. One of these days I'll make a video and leave in all of the time that I cut out of the video where I'm digging around looking for something that I can't find. It'll be like a 2-hour video. That looks pretty good to me. Alright, so I found a little 20 gauge round wire. And I usually use 18 for steps in these things, but if I go a size down, it'll still give me a nice lip around the outside. But I think if I did 2 layers of 18, like I normally would do to raise it enough to where the pavilion doesn't stick out the back, then it would be too tall. So I think I'm going to try 20 gauge and we'll see how that works. So it's just slightly too big still, so I'm going to snip out a little piece. I like to cut them a little big and then snip out pieces gradually until it fits snugly in there. That way you don't have a gap where they come together. When we do solder this in, you want to make sure it's in a flat plane like that. You don't want to have any waviness on it. Okay, that's good enough to get in there snugly. Right, we need to make a second one here, so I'm going to make a second one real quick. I'm just going around to make sure that that's pushed down as far as it'll go. And it appears to be in a flat plane. The easiest way to solder these ones I've found, these ones. I apologize for my colloquialism. I'm a retired English teacher, so I should know better. So you get a pretty nice shiny bottom there. Real symmetrical. Let's see how that stone fits now. Nice. Okay, so that one's done. So now let's do one for the square one. Square one's going to be a little bit more challenging, getting those corners all to match up nice in the bezel. I usually try not to do where the bezel is soldered on a corner, because that always makes it harder. So let's kind of use this as a guide. Try doing it. The thing that I do wrong on these sometimes is I don't pay attention enough to making sure that the edge of the pliers are straight and perpendicular to the sides of the bezel here in order to get a straight up and down bend. Oops. Bonus points for you if you can tell me why I put the solder joint not on a corner. Leave me a comment and impress me with your knowledge. Okay, now I have to do the same thing I did with the other one, which is to make a little platform. So where did I put that 20 gauge? So one thing I was thinking I would do is, this is really stiff 20 gauge, and that's because I pulled it from some thicker wire through a draw plate several times, and I didn't anneal it afterwards because I wanted to use it for ear wires. And so to make it more malleable to fit in here, I'm going to go ahead and anneal a little bit of it. That way it'll be softer and easier to bend those sharp corners. Annealing, if you're new to this, is how you soften the metal back up. And what you do is you just heat it up to kind of almost a reddish hue. You get just a little bit of a reddish tinge to it. You gotta be careful with thin wire like this because you can melt it pretty easily. But then let it cool off, and when it's mostly cool, then we'll quench it, and then it should be a little bit softer. So sometimes with bigger ones, and if I was using thicker wire, I might file a notch in this to get a sharper bend, but I think, given the size of this, we could probably get by with this without doing that. Clearly that side's a little bit longer, so we'll snip a little bit more out of there. That's better. Oh no! Where did you go? An executive decision was made off camera, and it was decided that Chad wasn't going to crawl around on the floor for an hour looking for a little piece of silver. So He just remade this one. Ah, look at that. That's pretty good. Okay, I'm going to do one more like that. I can find where the wire shot to now. Got to get this guy pushed in there. Okay, kind of like before, it's got a nice, neat looking outcome there. Okay, I made some bands here. Like I said, I used some little flattened 16 gauge here. I kind of filed them up and down like this so they match the side of the bezel, and then curved them slightly with my rotary tool. And now we'll just solder it on. And I do something called pick soldering, which is where I pick up a little bit of solder on the end of my pick, and once the metal gets up to the soldering temperature, I touch it there and then it just jumps on. It's a super convenient way to do things, and if you're interested, I have a pretty good video about it right there. Also, one of my more popular videos lately that I must have done a pretty good job on that one because it's going to town, and it's 5 tips on soldering for beginners or something like that. It's a pretty good video, I think. It's got some good logical advice about how to get better at soldering and why some, certain things happen when you're doing it. So you might check that out. I'm going to try and make sure it's sitting nicely in all directions there. That one looks like we got it okay, so we'll let him pickle for a while. And finally, I think this one's going to be cool. I hope when I leaned over there I didn't stick my head in front of the camera too much. Okay, well I'm going to let that pickle too, and then I'll get those cleaned up and I'll set those stones. So I got things polished up. Here's the first one. I'll get that bezel cleaned up a little bit better before I'm done. We got our amethyst. The little sparklies. It came out pretty nice. And then this one, I haven't set the stone yet. I've just put it in there. So with square stones, and I do this a little differently than some people, I use the flat side of this as my bezel pusher and the rounded part for burnishing. But prior to putting this stone in, because there's extra metal on the corners of stone bezels that have sharp corners like this, when you go to bend them over the top of the stone just a little bit, there's too much metal there and it tends to wrinkle on the corners. And that's why people do weird things on corners on their bezels sometimes. So I found that if you file the bezel just slightly thinner up there, right at the top where the corners are, that gives you just enough of a removal of mass from there that you're able to get it to sit in there nicely and lay over the stone a little bit. Once you got everything kind of laying down, we can just rub this across the top, right where the two meet. That's our third one. I think that came out really nice. I like that best of all of them, I think. So just some ideas to kind of change up some of your inventory to hit some different price points. I think those came out nice. Tell me what you think. Do you have other thoughts about this? Other ideas that you might try? Either way, I'll get some better pictures and put them at the end of the video. All right, well, that was 3 different tiny bezels and a way to flesh out your inventory a little bit for shows. I hope that you found that useful and enjoyable. If you did, make sure to hit the like button before you leave. I'd also love it if you take a moment and check out my main channel page. I have quite a few videos. I've been doing this for over 3 years now at 3 per week, and that adds up pretty quickly. And last I looked, there was 470-ish videos. I meant to check today and I forgot. So. But there's a lot of content, and there's almost certainly something else you'll find useful or enjoyable. So check those out. Make sure to subscribe to my channel. I'd love to have you following me. If you hit the bell, you'll get notifications, although I do 3 videos per week, one on Tuesday, one on Thursday, and one on Saturday. And I don't think I've missed one in 3 years. So another thing, if you're interested, down below in the video description, there's some important links. There's a link to my Patreon, of which there are multiple tiers of membership. The lowest tier just gets you my videos without the YouTube advertisement, which is probably kind of nice, I would imagine. And the other tiers get you gradually more and more privileges. So if you want exclusive tutorials, you'll want to sign up at the second tier. And we do some live streaming and stuff like that. So it's a nice place with a lot of cool people. So check that out. There's a link to my merch store as well if you want to get yourself one of those nice design idea sketchbooks where you can draw up your designs. There's a whole bunch of different models of those, and through the end of today they're on sale for 10% off, so check that out. Very useful way to keep track of your projects as you're doing them, and a way to remember how you did them if you want to go back and try them again. So, and there's a link to my latest ebook as well, which is an electronic book, and it has a page for each of the videos in last year's tutorials, of which there were over 170, I believe. And so each one has extra information, including a materials list, pictures, difficulty rating, additional information about the project that I thought about after I was done, whether I liked it, whether it was hard, whether I would have done it differently if I was to do it again, things like that. So it's a real useful kind of tool, and it has links right to all of the videos as well. So it's a great way to have a whole bunch of projects right at your fingertips, and a super nice way to support my channel. So get yourself one of those. Okay, well, thanks for watching today. Take care. Thanks. Happy silversmithing.